Draco Lucius Malfoy, victim of unfortunate circumstances or unforgivable villain. Today, we discuss. Hello and welcome back to Mischief Managed, where we put our literature degrees to good use while covering all things Harry Potter. If you're new here, welcome. We dive deep into the Wizarding world, covering obscure details, opinions, fan theories, and more, all while giving you a chance to brush up on your literature. I'm your host Lucy, and in today's episode, we'll discuss Draco Malfoy's arc and why I've always believed his fate turned out perfectly well. Thank you very much. Today's guests are a trio of classics: The Great Gatsby, Hamlet, and 1984. So strap in, get your popcorn ready, and let's talk. If you've forgotten the details about young Master Malfoy's story, here's a quick recap. In the early books, he's introduced to us as a spoiled brat, bullying our main trio and spewing his family's twisted ideas about blood purity. His torment of Harry, Ron, and Hermione ramps up as the years go on, but little changes in his actual character. Half-Blood Prince is when his arc really begins. Lucius is in Azkaban, their family is disgraced, and Voldemort's given him the impossible task of killing Dumbledore. He ends up ensuring the mission's success, but we see him spiral deep into depression in the process. In Deathly Hallows, his character gets even more complex. He's fully on the dark side now, yet ends up saving the trio's lives, and 15 years later, we see him happy and with a family of his own. And with that, we end the series with a semi-redemption arc for the character who began as our primary antagonist. The moment at Malfoy Manor was a crucial scene. It was, to me, enough for us to feel some much-needed sympathy for the character, the moment he finally chooses actively something good. It may have been small, but it was impactful and in line with who he was. In many ways, his arc mirrors that of Nick Carraway in The Great Gatsby. Like Nick, who becomes disillusioned to the Buchanan's hollow, status-driven world, Draco slowly starts to move away from his own family and their flawed ideologies. Both begin their stories enveloped by immorality and corruption. Both end them, to some extent, away from these worlds. They each make morally ambiguous choices that slowly morph into genuinely good ones, yet neither undergoes a true transformation. Neither become true heroes. Nick's story ended with his move back to the West, away from New York, Gatsby, the Buchanans, and, in his words, the foul dust that floated in their wakes. Considering how he enabled Tom and Daisy's adultery and saw Gatsby as a friend despite his morally questionable career, he isn't what we'd consider a typical hero, but we can find a subtler sense of heroism in his simple rejection of the Buchanan's ideals. Nick, like Draco, made good choices and bad ones, and at the end of it all, he chose peace and his own self-preservation, ending his story on a satisfying but not entirely heroic note. Now, you've likely seen people discuss all the reasons why they believe that Malfoy deserved a full-blown redemption arc. Different people will have different ideas, but the gist of it remains the same. He was just a boy. As Malfoy redemption arc activists say, he was raised in a hateful, prejudiced family who told him that he was superior and that his peers were inferior. You'd imagine how a young, impressionable, naive teenager would gobble that right up and allow such an upbringing to dictate his behaviors, at least in his early years of schooling. We see other examples of a similar indoctrination of youth in 1984. In Oceania, there are several organizations involving children and young adults, including the Spies, the Youth League, and the Junior Anti-Sex League, that all use youth to propagate the party's ideas, from doublethink to celibacy. Just as Draco, the child of Death Eaters, embraced his parents' ideas, the children of Oceania espoused the party's extreme principles. The corruption of youth serves as a prominent theme in the book. Julia, for instance, was seen as a dutiful member of the Junior Anti-Sex League, and the Parsons children were quick to report their father upon recognizing even a hint of anti-party behavior. Children and adolescents are more easily influenced and thus targeted, and Draco is no exception. But that doesn't erase his actions, not in the slightest. That does not change the fact that he was mean and prejudiced and all in all not a great guy, nor does it justify his actions and his choices, especially in the later books. Throughout the series, he's depicted as this somewhat brilliant but incredibly cowardly person who allows his fears and pressures to seize control of his life. It's never more apparent than in Half-Blood Prince, where we see him actively losing control of himself, lashing out, crying in the girls' bathroom, becoming increasingly desperate as he tries and fails to kill Dumbledore. Near the end of the book, he makes one final choice on the astronomy tower that essentially decided the course of the rest of his life. When Dumbledore offered him protection and with it a chance to choose good over evil and right his wrongs, he said no. He chose his family and his master and his allies. He chose what was easy over what was right. Consider another famous literary figure, Hamlet's titular protagonist. He too was forced to make a choice between easy and right, and unlike Malfoy, he chose the latter. He found himself depressed and wanting to give up on life and end his own, yet he chose to keep on living. That isn't an easy choice to make. It is infinitely more difficult to get up every day, keep on going, and choose actively to live rather than to simply stop. He chose to do his duty to his late father, to avenge his death, rather than take the easy way out. Contrary to Draco's choice of maintaining the status quo and choosing inaction, Hamlet took action. He took matters into his own hands and seized control of his own life, rather than allowing his circumstances to dictate its path, something Malfoy was given the opportunity and failed to do. By the time he made that choice, Draco Malfoy was already a mature man. 16, sure, might be an age we still consider young, but he had gone through enough to understand the joys and pains of life, to have a sense of right and wrong, and to understand deeply what either side of the ongoing war stood for. He knew full well that choosing to remain with the Death Eaters meant standing for murder and violence and genocide, and yet he made that choice. He's already at an age, at a level of independence where he knows better than that. There's every reason to hold him entirely accountable for that choice. Yes, his family was there. Yes, this was all he'd known. Yes, this was the easier choice, but at the end of the day, is it really reasonable to justify such a terrible, atrocious stance with such reasoning? Because it's easy. Malfoy was young, but does that necessarily warrant total forgiveness and full redemption for the multitude of horrible things he's done? I wouldn't say so. A quick break to thank the sponsor of today's episode, Rosetta Stone. This podcast is all about immersing ourselves in the wizarding world, but sometimes it's good to step back into reality and immerse ourselves in our world. Learning a language is the perfect way to do that, allowing you to connect with spaces and cultures different from your own. Rosetta Stone's innovative language learning experience is the perfect way to do just that. They combine simple, bite-sized lessons with interactive learning techniques, offering you a chance to fully develop your language skills. Go to rosettastone.com and enter the code POTTER20 for 20% off your first 3 months. Now, back to Draco Malfoy. Something I find people forget is that he didn't necessarily end as a villain. He did have some kind of half redemption in the end, and some closure to his story at least. He wasn't doomed to a terrible fate because of his childhood mistakes, rather given a second chance to make peace with himself and with the world around him. Part of his ending, I suppose, is a product of his privilege. Like Tom and Daisy in The Great Gatsby, Draco Malfoy grew up in a world of wealth and comfort. This affluence shielded him and his family from the repercussions of many of their worst actions. It's what protected them from conviction in the First Wizarding War, and it's undoubtedly part of what protected them in the Second, too. It's the same way the Buchanans got away with indirectly causing, possibly with Tom's full intention, Gatsby and Wilson's deaths, leaving New York and seeking a peaceful life less plagued by scandal after everything that happened. Once things got too heated, they simply retreated from the mess they themselves caused, back to their calm lives of immense privilege. Though the Malfoys did help save Harry's life in the end, their redemption felt more a product of their inaction than any real effort on their part. The reason given was their decision to flee the Battle of Hogwarts rather than to fight for the Dark Lord. Just like Tom and Daisy, they fled the mess they helped instigate, and for that, they were rewarded with a lifetime of peace. And I think that's exactly what Draco deserved, peace. To replace that softer style of a redemption with something more easily tangible, explicitly writing him as one of the good guys, actually choosing to defect from the Death Eaters and the life he was comfortable living would be entirely out of character. It'd mean ignoring the parts of him that were rightfully flawed, his cowardice and unwillingness to choose right over easy. Instead, he found himself somewhere that fit his character, never truly choosing to be good, but ultimately ending up there, or at least halfway so, by no choice or fault of his own. It's an ending that's not particularly significant or satisfying on the surface, but rather intriguing and makes more sense upon further thought, reminding us that morality isn't dichotomous, and that characters like Draco Malfoy should and do exist in the space in between. A final reminder to subscribe to our Patreon linked in the description, where you'll be able to recommend some more topics of discussion and text for us to connect to. Coming next week, the death of Ivan Ilyich, Never Let Me Go, and the yellow wallpaper. Thank you all very much for listening, and we'll see you next week.